Hey, what do you think? Take Mother of Tears, but make the old alchemist the main character, except he's not obviously gay now. He's obsessed with his wife and also not an alchemist, but a therapist, and is all set in Berlin in the 70s, and we'll call it Suspiria because that's a more well-known title. People love that, right? Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria is a pretentious pile of dog shit. Okay, is everyone suitably polarized? Wonderful. I love this new way of having to do things online. Pack in the profanity, but not too much adult content, because then they'll decide you're disposable. Really, though, it is not only one of the worst films I've ever had the misfortune to attempt to endure, it is quite possibly the worst, in name only, remake that I have ever seen. Join me for a bit while I completely read it for filth, won't you? I'm Hushcho, and I do not monetize on platforms like YouTube, so patronage and support is my only way of making money off of this. If you choose to support me, I'm very grateful. In any case, I'm glad you're listening. Let's go! The first thing that I take great exception with is having a film revolve around dance and not being able to get anyone who can actually choreograph or dance. In the original Suspiria, which I will be maintaining as the comparatively flawless gold standard, the setting was a dance academy. The students were presumed to already know how to dance, and the academy was a place where they could focus on honing specific pursuits. There were some classes shown, which was really the extent of what it could do and the extent of dance being related to the story. The remake, which I guess I'll call it here, attempts to focus far more on dance. But they didn't bother to cast anyone who could actually do that, and they absolutely did not consult anyone with ability in choreography to oversee the film. The only reason why any of the wobbling around in the movie is even interesting to any audience is because they're either basically naked or naked. That's it. It's not interesting, though. It's not sexy, it's not fun, and it's absolutely not scary. Except if you think about how easy it apparently is to get the rights to a film and remake it by using only names and a vaguely similar story element or two. The biggest problem with this movie is that it tries so hard to persuade the audience that it's all about dance. No, really! In the original, the teachers didn't even really dance, but they clearly knew their stuff. They're stern but clearly knowledgeable. The audience can believe in these people as the staff of an advanced dance academy. In the remake, that doesn't really come across. It tries so hard to focus on something it doesn't do well that it ends up dismantling any authority it tries to command. These people are believable neither as dancers nor as any kind of instructors on the topic. They're simply not that capable from any part of the film. I could list any number of endless problems with it, but off the top of my mind, here are the most obvious and egregious instances. They keep insisting the music be turned off all the time and insist as well that dancers should be able to keep beat in their heads. That's not what rehearsals are for. It's also not what auditions are usually like. You want to see the dancer dance to music, and if you're rehearsing something, you should at least have a metronome. There are plenty of dancers who find it difficult to keep a beat consistently. In fact, most people in general cannot consistently keep a beat in their heads. A metronome, or something else keeping beat, be it the tap of an instructor's cane or a drum machine or even the beat function on an electric keyboard, is essential for rehearsals and practice, especially when the people dancing are students. The absence of music makes the breathing really obvious, which I know is something the director went for. It's obnoxious, though, and not scary. It is, more than anything, unbelievably irritating after about 5 seconds of the first time. Stop obsessing with the breathing. In the original, the weird breathing was unsettling and odd, as well as extremely off-putting, largely because it wasn't overused. In the first half hour, it's shoved down our throats so many times in the remake that we just end up tuning it out and not caring much about it. The choreography is, as mentioned, not good, but it's also not photographed particularly well either. The angles and cuts do it no favors, and in general it just looks like a bunch of children spasming to music, or more often, nothing. Couldn't Tom York have done some music for them to actually listen to and dance to? He did a brilliant job on most of the soundtrack, but the underuse of music where it's actually, used in real life seems like a massive oversight and a huge mistake. There's a conspicuous absence of spotting in this movie that once you know what to look for, you'll notice very early on. Spotting is the quick turning of the head, to keep a dancer focused ahead and to avoid dizziness when spinning. Most notably, Susie in the remake does not even know this fundamental of dance. I'll be plain. The remake is not a horror film. It's not in the genre. It's more of a historical drama with fantasy elements. It is not set up for suspense. And since every scene takes just short of 4 fucking ever, none of that ever happens. It's not suspenseful or tense, especially when anyone who's seen the original will be waiting for the movie to catch up. Because it does was inspired by, elements of the original. It just does them in the most inept way possible. And it keeps treating them like this is something amazing, when it just changes something arbitrary about something else they were hoping people would recognize from the original. Like, ooh, they don't charge room and board in this Suspiria. That'll keep people guessing. Except it won't. And it doesn't. It's a stupid detail that just takes away from the danger of the setting, which manifests as a disturbing quality, a way of the movie keeping you and Susie at arm's length, never really fitting comfortably into the setting. In the original Suspiria, evil witches are suggested to be obsessed with material wealth and its accumulation. This is borne out in various students at the school, most notably Olga. Removing this makes it seem very confused. Are you sure you mean witch? By which I mean that the movie presents every woman as a complete piece of shit. Every single goddamn woman in this movie is an awful person. There's never any attempt at presenting the women of the troupe attempting to just persist through hardship in any respectable way, because by the time any effort is actually put into building that, it's immediately destroyed with self-indulgent bullshit that makes the situation clearly a bad one. It's also extremely conspicuous that the word witch in all the film's various languages is uttered time and again, and from a very early point when there's no real reason why they wouldn't just use a different word entirely. It's completely unsubtle, but the attitude of this production, whether intentional or otherwise, seems to be, you've seen the original, why are you watching this? I have to agree, though it's not a very good filmmaking philosophy. The involvement of witches in the story was kept very secret for quite some time in the original. It wasn't actually until over halfway through where the word witch was even said for the first time. It informed earlier scenes on retrospect and future viewings, unlike the remake, which knows what it should be doing, but does something else anyway. I'm not against films that try and present some sort of realistic scenario, but the remake goes out of its way to make every female character a terrible one. There are some movies I like where the message promotes brotherhood and sisterhood, like all men are brothers and all women are sisters and let's all sing Kumbaya and hold hands. It's not always a bad thing. But sure, I don't mind seeing a movie that confronts and examines this kind of thinking. But all the characters we're presumably supposed to feel sorry for either have no personality at all, or are just so poorly done that they might as well. Or they're just as bad as the people we're supposed to see as the villains. In the original, most of the characters were at least understandable in some way, if not likable, though most of them were at least likable enough. In the remake, the only character that holds any interest is Dr. Klemperer, who is a man, though he's played by Tilda Swinton. Which leads into this point. Why have Tilda Swinton, an adult woman, play an elderly man? Why even have him in the movie? He adds nothing. If anything, he takes away from the movie by it basically slamming on the brakes to see what the fuck he's up to right now. But did we need that? We could have actually had a real old man play the role. It would have certainly saved them massive amounts on money and prosthetics and makeup. Or you could, not put in a character completely created to form the backbone of a wholly superfluous reimagining who contributed nothing to even the story he was invented for. People do not speak in real life like they do in the remake. They have never spoken in real life like they do in the remake. They will never speak in real life like they do in the remake. Pick a fucking language and stick with it. If you're making the movie for an Italian audience, here's my advice. Pick fucking Italian and use that throughout the movie. When you put it in English, use English. A single paragraph worth of dialogue should not switch through 3 languages in it. It is not coherent and does not flow well. This is a basic conceptual thing of storytelling. You don't do that if you know anything at all about telling a story. Tom York did a terrific job with the soundtrack, which is genuinely haunting and longing, beautiful and eerie. It actually ends up doing a far superior job to the rest of the movie at building tension. If any of it is ever built at any point in the movie, it's due primarily to the music. So well done on that. The fashion direction, also, was at least interesting, if not always consistently well done. Too bad everything else sucks ass. Probably the worst offense is the interminable scenes. Just so many endless scenes and sequences of things that would almost always be better in brief cut. This isn't building tension or horror, it's just making the audience uncomfortable in the wrong way. Not the "I'm so afraid" way, but the "ugh, I wish this scene would end, it's not even interesting anymore" way. The audience is made far too familiar with things supposed to be frightening, and, as any of you who enjoy horror know, familiarity destroys horror. The direction is also really and truly awful. Some of the actors are amazing, like Tilda Swinton, who is amazing in everything, but the fact that the bulk of the rest are terrible really makes it clear that direction was lacking. Not all of these people are bad actors, but most actors need an able director, just like dancers need a metronome. Most people cannot just generate their own motivation and holistic portrayals. Even the photography is just terrible. There was a run-up zoom early on with Tilda that occurred in what was very obviously supposed to be an extremely dramatic, tense scene, but it was so ineptly done and so out of place that it was hilarious. It destroyed any of that flimsy attempt at building tension, and it should never have been done. It looked like something that even reality TV would have used for comedy. The story is nonsense, and it's incoherent nonsense. It spends no end of time on things that are either irrelevant or shouldn't be dwelt on so much, but it has no time at all for essential elements of story. None of the characters matter, whether retroactively or in the present of the storyline. The remake is absolutely pointless, which is a bit much to ask from an audience with a movie that's over 2.5 hours long. Nothing matters, no one has a satisfying or interesting storyline to them, and nothing really happens when you get right down to it. Instead of the terrible scale implicit in Argento's 3 films, the remake makes everything feel incredibly squalid and cramped with no scale whatsoever. How impressive can the 3 mothers be if they can just run off any time to break up a coven in Germany that's cramping their style? They're little more than a pack of zombies with a couple of bad special effects for powers. Maureen Attias's tits were scarier than that, come on now. Jessica Harper was cast solely to claim a real link with the original. Masking Tilda Swinton's other roles was, similarly, a stunt to generate controversy, but it was stupid and something which obviously could not be maintained for any length of time. This was somebody's art film, given a vague association with a legendary classic of its genre, because clearly someone on production knew no one would watch it otherwise. It's not a good movie on its own merits, and it's certainly not one that favorably compares to the original. Reimagining or not, the remake is a bad film and brings nothing to the table. It's not even a pointless remake for just replicating the original shot by shot. It's a pointless remake because the original was as close to perfect as it could possibly be. It was a fairy tale, and that's what it was conceived as. It doesn't need the complications introduced by the remake's attempt at telling its own story. The remake, long story short, doesn't deserve your time. It is that bad. Watch the original Suspiria, which is really the only one worthy of that name. There's no magic in the remake, no wonder or horror. It's just a depressing slog through divided Berlin, which is horrifying in its own way, but it's nothing the film uses. In many ways, that sums the remake up perfectly. It only ever ends up being anything close to scary accidentally. Nothing it sets out to do manages to be interesting, frightening, fun, amusing, entertaining. It's a needless movie that was pointlessly made. It's garbage. In fact, it's over 2.5 hours of garbage. That is really and truly inexcusable. I can only hope that Tilda Swinton will, in future, reconsider wasting her time and considerable talent with such a terrible director as Luca Guadagnino. And we can all hope that Dakota Johnson will, in future, reconsider wasting our time with acting. You're welcome.